All right, guys, I'm back today to do part two of a video I released recently that seemed like a lot of people really enjoyed it a lot, where I talked about some of my favorite science fiction films. And as I said in that video, I think I had one movie that was kind of a bigger science fiction movie. I kept it relatively small scale and talked about a lot of like more indie or smaller science fiction movies that I don't feel like get a lot of attention. And today I'll mix it up a little bit. There might be a couple of bigger name movies in there, but I'm going to also try to put some films in there that you may have never seen before, because that's my favorite thing, is to discover science fiction movies that I'd never heard of before. And so I would love, as always, for you guys to leave comments down below of some of your favorite science fiction films. I really loved reading the comments last time. So let's get into it right now. So first up is going to be the A24 produced film After Yang from director Kogonada. This movie came out a couple years ago and I absolutely adored it. This is like a very quiet, small scale science fiction movie, sort of in the same vein as Ex Machina, but it has less of like a mean spirited tone to it. It's much more loving and compassionate. It's about a family. It's a husband and wife couple with a young daughter, who the daughter is Asian and she was adopted, and the family really wanted her to be able to learn about her heritage, and so they got a robot who appears to be Asian, so that she could have someone in her life that could teach her about her heritage and learn more about who she was as a person. And the robot starts to break down, and the family does not have a lot of money, and so the father, played by Colin Farrell, takes the robot in to get repaired. And throughout the movie we start to uncover thoughts from the robot and what it was going through towards the tail end of it being activated. And the entire film is, can the robot be saved, and learning about what it did for the family while it was around. And I think that this movie is a really beautiful look at artificial intelligence in a more positive light in this movie, and how it was impacting this family in a way that was a positive to this young girl and her growth. But it's also one of those films similar to Ex Machina that it also explores the idea of, could artificial intelligence become sentient and have the ability to like grow as a person and grow as an actual entity. And I love those films that kind of dive into that. I talked about Blade Runner 2049 in the last video, and how that kind of dives into the same subject matter. And I think the whole idea behind artificial intelligence and robotics is fascinating when it comes to the science fiction world. And this movie is really beautiful and quiet compared to a lot of science fiction films that I've talked about in these other videos. And I think it's a very unique experience, and one that is 100% worth having. Up next is going to be the film Beyond the Black Rainbow from director Panos Cosmatos. This is one of the weirdest and wildest science fiction films that I have ever seen, but it's also one of the most creative. It takes place in this like institute, and we see this young girl who is essentially being held captive by this doctor. And it is a very simple premise, but so much happens visually. There are so many stunning and incredible cinematographical sequences in this that have not left my mind since the first time I watched the movie. Panos Cosmatos is a phenomenal director. He's only done 2 feature-length films, but the fact that this was his debut, and it's so remarkable to look at, and it's not necessarily expositionally heavy. Most of what you're learning is through visual implications and small lines of dialogue delivered, where you can kind of piece together in your head what's going on. But I think this movie is so much more about experiencing it, and just the visuals kind of overtaking you, and the incredible sound design in this movie. It's just a really remarkable science fiction film, similar in the vein of like Under the Skin, where so much of it is just the immersive experience of this movie. It gets incredibly violent in moments. The third act went in a direction that I was not expecting, but it's a movie that is really incredible if you're a fan of science fiction. Up next is a fun little comedy movie called Safety Not Guaranteed, and this is a time travel movie that is about a young woman played by Aubrey Plaza, who works for like a newspaper or a magazine, who they're trying to do an article, something new and unique, and she finds an ad in the paper that is essentially asking for someone to be a time travel buddy. And she's like, this is going to be ridiculous. And she ends up going to visit this person, played by Mark Duplass, who 100% believes that he has built a time machine and that he has the capability to travel back in time. And it's about her starting to love him as a person and really seeing his troubled past and where he has gone to now, why he's so interested in traveling back in time. And it's a really beautiful and funny movie while also incorporating the science fiction element in a way that feels really natural and authentic. And that's what I really liked about this movie a lot, is that it used science fiction as its vehicle, but there's a lot more going on outside of that. And I just think the word to use for this movie is charming. It's really charming and entertaining. It's a movie that I went back and revisited a year or two ago after not have seen it for a couple of years, and I loved it just as much. I think the cast is really great. They work really well together. Their chemistry is really great, and it's truly hilarious. And it's a movie that is just really easy to sit down and watch, that incorporates science fiction in a very natural way. Up next is the film Spring from directors Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. This is a film that the science fiction is incorporated in a way that's kind of shocking. It's about a young man who has recently lost both of his parents and he's living on his own. He doesn't really have a ton of friends, and so on a whim, he decides to travel to Europe and he meets this young woman, and the two of them hit it off. But he finds out the young woman isn't all that she says that she is. She's like this Lovecraftian creature who can transform into different things. And it's all about, once he discovers what she is, can the love between the two of them survive? And honestly, the way I would describe this movie is it's kind of like if the Before trilogy met a science fiction body horror movie. The dialogue is really beautiful between the characters in the film. The dialogue feels very natural. I love the way the chemistry between the characters builds as the movie goes on. The way Moorhead and Benson are able to build suspense between the characters is really great. Science fiction love stories, I think they're awesome. It's really cool to be able to incorporate a love story in science fiction, and the way this one does it was so unique. I was not expecting it at all. I watched this movie a few years ago when I was binging Moorhead and Benson's entire catalog, and this is probably still my favorite movie in their entire catalog of films. They've made some really fantastic science fiction movies, but I think this thing is shot really well. I really love both of the lead performances. I think they're both fantastic, and it's a movie I don't hear a whole lot of people talk about, but one I wish people would talk about a lot more because it is awesome. I wanted to talk about at least one David Cronenberg film, but I want to talk about Crimes of the Future because it's David Cronenberg's most recent movie, and I honestly think it's one of his most impressive, and I think it's one of his most understated films. People don't appreciate it as much as I think they should. I love the world of this movie. I also love what the subject matter symbolically represents. It goes in a really wild direction. The visuals are fantastic in this, especially the practical effects that Cronenberg uses. And I think it's a really fantastic societal commentary. All the performances in this movie are phenomenal from top to bottom. And it's just a really immersive film that kind of reminds me of like a sci-fi noir, just the way that it's structured. There's definitely a mystery element behind it. And I see more people talking about it now that the movie's been out for a while, but I was really surprised that this film didn't receive a lot more love when it was first released, because I think it is absolutely remarkable, and I think it's one of David Cronenberg's best films in his catalog. I know I said I wasn't going to mention a ton of bigger movies, but I am going to talk about John Carpenter's The Thing. This is probably one of my favorite science fiction films of all time. I think John Carpenter is a genius, and he's one of the best horror directors ever, and this is one of the greatest horror sci-fi movies ever made. The level of tension and suspense in this is just unlike anything I've ever watched in another movie. It keeps you on the edge of your seat from the very beginning until the very end. The performances in it are absolutely amazing, and what I love is how unsettling it is. If you put this movie on in a room, turn all the lights off, and watch it by yourself, even if you've seen it 100 times, I feel like it's still going to hit you the same way. The practical effects are amazing. I can't believe for how old this movie is that the practical effects still hold up as well as they do. too, but they're fantastic. They're really just, it really surprises me that a movie like this kind of stand the test of time. And it's a movie I recommend to everyone that loves horror. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, you are 100% missing out. And it's just remarkable. And it'll 100% be one of my favorite films of all time for the remainder of my life. This one might take people by surprise when I classify it as science fiction, but I do want to talk about Lars von Trier's Melancholia, which is a film that is one of the most accurate depictions of depression that I've ever seen in a movie. And it utilizes that feeling of anxiety mixed with depression by incorporating this element of something colliding with Earth and ending the world as we know it, and the feelings that you would have towards that if you were already sunk into this overwhelming pit of despair of depression. What's really interesting about the way Lars von Trier frames this movie is that it takes place during a person's wedding, which is supposed to be the happiest time of their life, but because they're dealing with so much and struggling with so much, they can't really embrace that. They don't really feel much excitement towards it. And I think that feeling of crushing depression just resonates in this movie in a way that is so authentic to the actual feeling of going through that. And it just leaves you feeling really empty. It's not a very optimistic movie, but it is a remarkable movie. Visually, it is stunning. Kirsten Dunst's performance in it is just remarkable. It's a film that the first time I watched it, I just couldn't believe it existed because of how amazing it is. And I think it's the best film in Lars von Trier's catalog. And it's one that if you are a film lover and if you love experimental film, you 100% need to watch it. And then I'll end with another big one because it's on my shirt, but I love Alien. I think it's one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. The tension and suspense in that movie is unlike anything else. I love the practical effects in it. All of the performances in it are exceptional. It's a classic for a reason, and I think it's really interesting how many sequels have been made to Alien over the years. And there are sequels of Alien I really like, but I start to wonder how much more you can do with a person running down a hallway, running away from an alien. Like, you can only do it so many times before it becomes tiresome, but this kind of started it all. It's atmospheric. I love the production design of the ship. It's just an amazing science fiction movie that is really simple when you think about it. It's not super complex. It's just remarkably filmed and remarkably acted, and I love it a lot. So what are some of your favorite science fiction films? Let me know in the comments. I love science fiction as a genre. As I said before, I had a super ton of fun making the first video, love making this one, and you'll have to let me know if you want me to make a part 3. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.